Then there's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. When I told a colleague a couple of weeks ago that I was going to soon have California State Senator Sidney Kamlager as a guest on this podcast, my colleague enthusiastically noted, "Oh, isn't she the senator who does those fun little newsy videos on Twitter every Wednesday?" And I said, "Videos? On Twitter? Every Wednesday? How come I know nothing about that?" And so I quickly hustled over to Twitter and found @Sidney Kamlager and discovered and quickly became hooked on and now have binge-watched all of the past segments of Watch Wednesday, Senator Kamlager's weekly short but sweet Twitter video update, posted on Wednesdays, of course. I guess it can be described as 3 parts legislative update, 1 part cultural literacy lesson, with an occasional tasty pinch of glib and glam. Here's a sample of a Watch Wednesday. Listen.
Watch Wednesday, did you blaze it yesterday? I hope so. So, I am hoping that you will tune in to the Hey Now, the hottest news show in town. It's called the Senate Rules Committee, and it's every week at 1:30 p.m. Now, I'm a regular on the show. I'm not the host. That is P.T. Atkins, and Governor Newsom is the guest coordinator. He brings all the folks to the show.
So if you have not yet caught on to any of the Watch Wednesday segments, let this edition of Then There's California serve as the appropriate tease for the weekly episodes, and also to offer you further entree into the life and activities and vision of State Senator Sidney Kamlager, who represents the 30th Senate District in Los Angeles, an area that includes a large part of South LA, Century City, and Culver City. Sidney Kamlager is one of those senators I've been referring to in our conversations as a freshman, but not really a freshman. She was sworn in as a state senator in March after a special election, but had already represented a good part of the same district since 2018 as a state assembly member. As a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, and now one of only 2 African-American members of the state Senate and the only African-American woman in the state Senate, she hails from Chicago, Illinois, but came to Southern California to go to college at USC. And here in California, she has mostly stayed. She is a daughter of the arts, a spouse, a mom, and we'll let her fill in the blanks on all of that and elaborate on her work as a lawmaker and an advocate and her policy priorities. So, proud to welcome for the first time to Then There's California, the host and the creative genius behind Watch Wednesdays, among her other talents, State Senator Sidney Kamlager. Great to have you join us.
Thank you so much. I want to meet that person that you introduced. She sounds amazing.
She sounds amazing. When I was standing here waiting to come into the room, Pro Tem Tony Atkins walked by. I told her I was getting ready to do a podcast with Senator Sidney Kamlager, and she said, "Oh my gosh, you will love her. She's delightful. She is a shining star." So
no pressure.
You seem to have that reputation amongst your colleagues of being that shining star and that delight.
Well, you know, I think what folks think of when they think of me is they don't know what I'm going to say.
But that's good, right?
That's very good. That's very good. I get tons of folks that say, "Oh my God, what are you going to say about this? What are you going to do?" Oh my goodness.
You never know what Sidney Kamlager is going to say.
That's right.
See, so you've got us all enraptured.
I have you hooked, yes.
So speaking of that, right away to the important stuff. I love your Watch Wednesdays. They are fun. They are thought-provoking. They are timely. I went through and, like I said, I watched all of them on Twitter. I covet them now every week. I'm waiting for the DVDs to come out. So tell us about them. Are they your new means of communication to the district and to your followers?
Yeah, I have to say, they are very pressure-inducing. When we started the Watch Wednesdays, I forgot that Wednesday comes every week. And so you have to come up with something every week. But it was certainly my way of like cutting through the noise, of giving people an inside look at what it means to be in the legislature. I think so many folks have different ideas of our reality. Everything is fun, and it's not as glamorous as it looks on television. So that was part of it. And then also to kind of give people a tutorial about the legislative or the budgetary process. Because getting all of your information off the internet or your own mind is probably not useful and always helpful. So it was a little bit of both. And then you have to have fun.
Do you get a good response from people?
Oh, yes. We get lots of views, more views when we have music. I have to temper myself. My chief is always reminding me that you cannot be outing people and being rude to people. Try to keep the few friends you have. So I do try to think about that. But, if the truth has to be told, sometimes the truth has to be told.
I understand. And, when you talk about trending, I suppose a more provocative approach gets the views and the clicks. But you're right. You're also an elected official, and sometimes those kind of things can come back to haunt you.
Oftentimes.
As I mentioned, you, like a handful of colleagues who are transitioning from the Assembly to representing 1 million people in your Senate district, you're a freshman, but not really. You are familiar with the legislative process and the ebb and flow of legislative life, but it's a new legislative house now. It's the upper house. And near the time folks will be hearing this podcast, you will be celebrating your first 100 days in office in the Senate. Senator Sidney Kamlager, the first 100 days. Maybe celebrating is a little too over the mark, but at least commemorating.
Yeah.
So have these first 100 days here in the upper house been satisfying and seamless and invigorating? Tell us about the transition.
Definitely not seamless. Lots of fun, new things to learn and understand. And in a way, somewhat underwhelming, because I was sworn in. I won during a time of COVID. I got sworn in during a time of COVID. No pomp and circumstance, no bringing folks up. I mean, my husband came in, my stepkids, but it was very intimate. The nice thing was when I got sworn in, my family was allowed to watch on Zoom, which isn't something that out-of-state folks, are able to do when we get sworn in here in the state capitol. So, but outside of that, it's been new, fewer people on the Senate side.
And that's a good thing, right? From some of my conversations with your other colleagues, that actually makes negotiation and cooperation just a tad bit easier.
Just a tad bit. But I will say the voting is different. You're not voting with a button. Once you cast your vote on the Senate floor, you can't change it. And if you do, you can only go to a yes or a no. So I've had some flubs on the floor because of that. And currently I sit all the way in the cheap seats in the back. Because of spatial distancing, we're not able to sit at our desks. So I actually don't even know where my desk is. That's interesting. And there's no time limits on talking. So we actually do have a filibuster on the Senate side.
Well, beyond those 100 days, you, along with your other 119 colleagues, have been navigating legislative and personal life during a pandemic. How has the last year plus treated Sidney Kamlager and her communities?
Well, the last year put too many pounds on Senator Kamlager, so she is working to get rid of those.
I notice you're talking about yourself in the third person. That helps a little, doesn't it?
Yes, well, I got fat. So I'm certainly working to kind of get that off of me. I was able, like many people, to spend more time with family, which was important because we had a number of health scares in my own family, and just being in close proximity was nice. And it was really scary because each day you were hearing more and more from constituents about the fears and the challenges that they were having. And you realized this is really why I ran for office. This is really when government should be stepping up. I happen to represent a district that has enormous amounts of poverty and wealth. If you go to the southern part of the district, it looks very different from the northern part. But, small businesses were closing across the district. Yeah, people were complaining across the district about not being able to get EDD. Folks were concerned about public health and access at the time to testing and just useful information, and then later on to vaccines. And everyone was talking about the chasms in our infrastructure. If it's public education, if it's public health, if it's social services and safety net services. And so what I learned is government has to do a better job of being transparent and honest, talking to people in layman's terms about what we do, what we're supposed to do, and how we can do it better.
I want to talk to you about your predecessor in legislative office, the peerless Holly Mitchell, once described as the conscience of the legislature. You were elected to what was her assembly seat after she came to the Senate, and then you ran for and were elected to her open Senate seat when she joined the LA County Supervisors, the Board of Supervisors last fall. I want to be careful not to position this as Sidney Kamlager, oh my God, you have big shoes to fill in your legislative service. The 30th Senate District is your district now, and you have your own policy priorities. But having said that, you worked for Holly Mitchell as her district office director. You followed her path of ascension through the legislature. She is your friend and mentor. How have Holly Mitchell's priorities, values, instincts informed and, I guess you could say, imprinted on your legislative path? And even how have yours perhaps diverged from hers?
So I actually met her long before she ran for office.
At Crystal Stairs,
yes,
right?
When she hired me at Crystal Stairs, which is a nonprofit child development agency that helps families find and pay for child care. And I worked with her. I was the legislative director and the comms person for this nonprofit organization. And that was a great training ground about what government does. So from that time, working with her, you get a deeper understanding of, how to be a better or a successful advocate, how to work inside and outside of the system, and how to be incredibly resilient. I also got, firsthand experience working with her, seeing the double-edged sword of being a black female legislator.
Sure.
People call you for certain things, but not for other things. People want you in the room on Monday, but maybe not in the room on Tuesday, and how to navigate that. And we think, you have this title, so, all's good. Not so much. I think we're very similar in terms of the values and the philosophies that we hold. I think that I may be a little more Black Panther radical than Senator Mitchell. She's much nicer than me in some respects. And, the running joke would be like, "Ooh, Miss Kamlager, she doesn't like you, she's mean." Or I just get maybe a little too radical.
But that's what California needs right now.
Thank you. So I think that's where we diverge a little bit, but not so much. We still giggle and laugh and talk. And we need her now more than ever, actually, in LA County as one of the supervisors on the board. So that's exciting. Big shoes to fill. The good thing is she never asks you to fill her shoes in her way. She asks you to fill the shoes in a way that benefits the district and the constituents that live in it. And that's what I've been trying to do.
Well, I am sure it is not lost on you, as I mentioned in the outset of this conversation, that you as an African-American woman are replacing the only other African-American woman in the Senate, one of only 2 African-American senators in the whole House and the Legislative Black Caucus. And if the numbers were so truly to mirror and be representative of the communities of color out there in California, women and African Americans, it would and should be much larger.
Yes.
The larger makeup here on this.
Tell the truth, Brian. Tell the truth.
I'm trying. What's your comment on that?
We need more people like us, representing us. That is for sure. So until that happens, I am going to continue to ask, folks like Senator Allen to get up on the floor and talk about black hair like he did last week. And I'm going to continue. That bill came up and
right.
I said, people care about the hair, Mr. Allen. And he was like, I know. And I said, I want to make sure that we're being culturally sensitive, because I've had many a time when I've gone into a salon and came out looking like Bozo because somebody did not know how to handle black hair, and they need the training. And he was like, that happened to me too. So I'm going to say something. We'll get to the mic, Brother Allen. So as long as we continue to have those kinds of discussions, which then find their way onto the floor, I will still be working to expand our numbers. But I will, at least I have some degree of confidence that my colleagues are listening to the things that I'm saying and appreciate that they're coming from a black female lens.
I appreciate you bringing that up. Stacey Abrams, who ran for election in 2018 to be the first woman and the first person of color as the governor of Georgia, a powerhouse. She did an interview with NPR a couple of weeks ago, and it struck me enough that I wrote it down. She said women, and women of color in particular, are expected to know what we're talking about with a degree of specificity that is not often always expected of our counterparts. When you are fighting for something, when there are those in power who do not want you to have it, you have a superior obligation to try and demonstrate the importance of change. Do Stacey Abrams' comments, based on everything you've already said, resonate with you?
Yes. So Stacey Abrams is kick-ass and an amazing shero. B, she's absolutely correct. I don't know if folks saw this clip where she was being asked by a representative about voting rights and all of the things that the bill would do, and she enumerated them, and he was exhausted.
That's actually what she was referring to.
Yes. And so he had to pivot and ask another question. And I was like, I know he thought that she wasn't prepared, and she knew he thought she wouldn't be prepared, so she showed him. And it happens all the time. I'm struck by when we're having discussions about particular policies that impact black folks, people will come up with every anecdote and question and demand for specificity that they don't do for other kinds of bills. They say, well, just let it get through the process. Something to consider, but just let's keep talking and voting. But when it's something cultural, when it's something black, they want this degree of specificity that's not asked about other kinds of bills. So why is the standard different? Tell me. Well, they can't answer that. And you don't want to bring it up all the time, but sometimes you have to remind folks. We cannot be hypocrites in this space when we're talking about legislation and policy, and we cannot expect one kind of, or place one standard on one person or one population and not have the same expectation, and then get salty when I, for example, ask for that kind of a standard, from that particular colleague or another kind of bill. And ultimately, what it's about is, are you willing to step out of your comfort zone? Are you willing to handle and deal with your own fears? And B, what's your level of respect for someone that doesn't look like you or doesn't represent the kind of district that you represent?
Beautifully put. Let's continue talking about you, Sydney Kamlager.
I love me.
Well, I guess you could say we're already talking about you, but let's go further. Sydney Kamlager, this is your life. Before the legislative part of your career, coming from the Midwest, born and raised in Chicago, your political and social justice influences and artistic influences there, right on to your, as I say, westward migration to USC in Southern California, and then back east to Carnegie Mellon, and then back to LA. I mean, your mom is an actress, right?
Yes.
And your dad's an artist, so definitely some right brain encouragement and fruit of the spirit as growing up. Tell us about that life.
So, love being a child of the Midwest. I think Chicago is one of the best cities in the world. Music, art, parks. It is a garden, a city in a garden. That's actually its motto, and love the food. Born to an interracial couple that was denied housing in Chicago because they were interracial. They actually got an appeal from the city to move into their apartment, where the landlord was confused that they were good tenants that didn't tear the place up, and even more confused that they were going to have this little mixed baby and wanted to know what I was going to look like. So I was brought up by parents who believed in struggle and believed in kind of the beat of their own drum. Then moved to New York with my mom when my mom and my dad separated, and went to public school there. That's where she met her now husband, my stepdad, Kerry James Marshall. She worked at Studio Museum in Harlem. I would spend my days getting on the A train, going up to the museum, listening to musicians like Cecil Taylor, and going to art exhibitions of David Hammons and Houston Conwell and these amazing black artists that were in New York at the time. And then came back to Chicago to go to high school, helped my Nana, who was a nurse at the Robert Taylor housing projects. That's a whole story. Helped her work to get Harold Washington elected as mayor of Chicago.
Mayor of Chicago, yes.
And then came out here to go to USC to spend time with my dad. And I was here when the riots happened. I was here when the earthquake happened. And so after that, I worked with Peter Sellers with the LA Festival, which really worked to use art to bridge communities together. That was one of the reasons I think the city went on fire, was because communities were not talking to each other. But the earthquake sent myself to Carnegie Mellon because I don't believe in shaking ground.
That was the 94 earthquake.
That was so scary.
Yes.
And I wear glasses. I have terrible eyesight. I was in my little studio apartment. The earth started shaking. The transformers were going off. Dogs were barking. And I couldn't find my glasses. I couldn't see. And it was in the very early hours of the morning. And I thought, oh, my God, I'm going to die. And when I finally got my glasses and went downstairs, there was all this smoke pluming up from, all of the buildings that had been shaking, and people were outside in their cars listening to the radio, and it looked like a scene out of Return of the Body Snatchers. And I just remember thinking, I don't know how anyone survives living in a state where this can happen. But there was a run at the grocery store down the street of water, and then the building got red tagged. It was really one of the scarier moments of my living here.
And enough to make you
I sure did.
Migrate back to the
east. I said snow over earthquakes any day.
Yes.
But I'll have to tell you, a girl living in Chicago, a girl living in New York, the only time when I was stuck up was actually living in LA.
Oh, okay.
So if people want to say New York is dangerous and Chicago is dangerous,
okay.
LA put hair on my chest, let me tell you.
Okay. And actually, you worked in the arts at the nexus of the studios and the networks, I believe with the nonprofit art studios and with actor Delroy Lindo. So you've done the nonprofit world. Obviously, USC whetted your appetite and Carnegie Mellon whetted your appetite for politics, but also arts and entertainment, too. Yeah.
So when I went to USC, I was there with a number of folks that made it in the entertainment industry. And then I did nonprofit work at Spark doing public murals because I really wanted to focus on advocacy and helping artists get funded and increase their visibility. And then spent time working for Delroy Lindo, who was recently in The Five Bloods.
Yes, marvelous movie. He was fantastic.
Yes. So he's a friend and a mentor and really helped me see what happens behind the lens for folks who are working in the industry. So I think that's how I've been able to develop really strong relationships with IATSE and other folks in labor, because these are amazing jobs. They're good paying jobs. They come with a lot of opportunity, with pensions and good benefits, and not very diverse. So that's why I push so much for the film industry and for the theater industry, because we need to get everyone paid. We need to diversify the pipeline. And people don't understand how therapeutic and how healing and how enforcing the arts are, both for folks who are in front of the camera and those who are behind it. So that was a great opportunity for me.
And in fact, that a lot of these powerhouse artists and powerhouse actors from the communities of color actually are bankable. They can bring in.
They're totally bankable. I mean, you know, Sam Jackson is probably they said he's been in like almost every movie that's made nowadays. You know, Regina Hall has been getting a lot more work as a director. I mean, Nomadland with the director Chloe Zhao, who was amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's go closer to home.
Okay.
You're a spouse.
Yes.
You're a mom.
Yes.
You're a stepmom.
Yes.
Coming from a mixed race family now to a blended family.
Yes.
Tell us about navigating as a professional, as an elected official, the dynamics of being in a blended family. And yes, this is a question that I would ask a male senator if he were sitting here and this was his story.
Yeah. Well, you know, blends are hard. I'm a stepmom and I love my stepchildren as my own, and I recognize that they also have biological mothers that are also in their lives, and it's like, how do you find this happy medium? And you know, sometimes honestly there just isn't a happy medium. My role is to make sure that I am there for my husband, my partner, to uplift him as a father and to help the role that he has invested his life in as successful as possible. I have to say, Monday through Thursdays being up here is really difficult. You know, I like being at home. I'm a homebody. I'm a Cancer. We like to stay at home and cook. I sleep better when I'm at home.
Sure.
You know, last night was really stressful because we thought that the cat had been lost, and I just, you know, it's like you're away from home in this little janky apartment up here.
And you're on Zoom trying to talk everybody off the ledge at home,
well,
right?
They spent a long time before they called me, and then my husband was incredibly measured when he was like, I have something to tell you. So that's hard.
Sure.
You miss out on moments like that. You also miss out on the mundane moments of just like walking in and seeing one of your family members smile at you and tell you about their day and know that you're being present, you know, for them. So it's really tough. And I tell myself I'm up here actually to do the work, because that makes me feel a lot better about being away from home. But, you know, I live in a really small apartment up here. I have one cup, I have one glass, I have one plate, I have one bowl. I have a bed that's on the floor. I mean, you know, my staff actually came by to help me, and they I think, wanted to do an intervention after the fact. They said, should she be living like this?
This story actually sounds familiar to some of your other colleagues that are from parts farther than Sacramento.
My husband says that. He came up, he said, do you like living like this? You know, I mean, it's a lot different at home, yeah?
Right,
you actually have food.
You say, hey, I watch Nomadland. I got it down now. So.
Hello. Frances McDormand got nothing on me.
That's right. Putting on your mother lens, and also in representation of the mothers in your own district, the parents in your own district. The Oakland's Insight Center comes out every other year with this report on the cost of being Californian, using a tool called the Family Needs Calculator. And over the years, it has documented the rising tide of inequality in California. But 2020, surprise, surprise, was startling. Skyrocketing child care costs, particularly for mothers of color needing child care, wages paid to working moms that don't support the cost of living, mass incarceration that siphons away money from black and brown communities, making it clear that the cost of living in this state is hurting people of color and women. It's not COVID, they say. COVID did its damage, but it's really rather a systemic racism, and essentially the conclusion of the report is having kids is becoming a white privilege in California.
Amen.
So as a spouse and a mom, how clearly does that resonate with you?
Let me tell you something. It's incredibly expensive to have and raise kids in this state. You know, we know that 2 million women dropped out of the workforce last year because of COVID. The ones who were able to come back were white without children. That number has not declined significantly. So that says a lot. People cannot afford to manage child care with their children's education and working, either not having the child care or having it and not being able to afford it. And so we have a responsibility to be honest about how much it costs for all kinds of folks on the income strata. And if we really care about equality, if we really care about equity, then how do we economically solve those issues? When you overlay race and ethnicity on top of these issues, people's minds get fuzzy and they tune out. So I like to talk about the money. And the reality is, the greater the number of folks on assistance in our criminal legal system, not in our schools getting educated, the more it's going to cost everyone else as taxpayers to deal with the outcomes that come. Folks didn't pop out of the womb homeless. I mean, some have now because of this pandemic that we're in, called homelessness.
Absolutely.
But from an analytical perspective, that's not how it happens. So how are we creating conditions where people are poor? And then how are we creating conditions where black and brown disproportionately are poor? You know, it costs money for someone to get arrested, their family. It costs to be on probation. It costs to be on parole. It costs to go into the courts. The family or that person has to absorb all of those costs. So you're only sort of exacerbating the economic condition that they're in by creating these exceedingly punitive laws that ask folks to come back to a system that is taxing them for being poor and taxing them for everyone else being afraid of them. It makes no sense.
This is a beautiful segue to my next part of this conversation, talking about legislation. You do have a legislative package for 2021 that you're moving through the process this year, much of which is focused on social justice and racial justice and correcting imbalances in our criminal justice system. And they are assembly bills that you authored when you were in the assembly, correct me if I'm wrong, and at the beginning of the new legislative session, you brought your bill children over with you here to the Senate.
Baby.
So let's do a little lightning round here of a few of these bills, and just to get some of your top line descriptions on them based on some of the things you've just talked about. AB 118, the Crises Act, which builds on legislation that you authored in your earlier days in the Assembly, fully funding emergency-based alternatives to policing, which has certainly become a vivid debate point in states all over the U.S. in the wake of the killing of George Floyd last year. Tell us about the Crises Act.
If you call 911, let's have community-based organizations who are trained and have the credibility of the community to come out and respond to them so that 911 law enforcement doesn't have to. 70% of calls to 911 are non-criminal, non-violent in nature.
AB 333, seeking to reduce the harm California's gang enhancements law has on communities of color. The gang enhancement laws are racist in their application, and they lack legal protection. So your bill, AB 333, will help. It's called the Step Forward Act. Tell us about it.
So this one is putting gray on my hair, let me tell you. 333 is about due process. Right now we have a law in place that says if you do something bad, that the prosecutor can charge you for doing something bad and then levy a gang allegation on you. And all they have to do is prove that you've done something bad and then just say, do you think the person's in a gang, yes or no? So this bill would say, let's have a little due process, let's bifurcate the charges, and have you prove each charge on its own.
AB 369, the Street Medicine Act, increasing access to health and social services for those experiencing homeless. I'm talking like I wrote the bill, but you actually did it. So tell us about AB 369.
It's taking medicine to the streets. We're putting providers on the streets so that they can meet homeless folks where they are and give them the health care that everyone deserves.
And finally, ACA 3, Assembly Constitutional Amendment 3, which would strike out the words, and I plead my ignorance, I was surprised to hear this. It strikes out the words involuntary servitude from the California Constitution. Currently, the state constitution prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude except to punish crime. Wow.
Yeah, wow. So, all I have to say is, like Barry Jenkins, Underground Railroad, Colson Whitehead, why don't we just end slavery? It's happening in our prisons. It's happening in our camps with probation. Vestiges of the past that are still haunting us in our Constitution.
Talk to me about these bills. Are these bills moving through? Are you getting cooperation and support from your colleagues as you work on these justice-related issues? The hardest fight has been 333 because the word gang scares the bejesus out of people. You think about colors and menace to society and your brain shuts down. So it's been a lot of work to help people kind of, remain open. And then, I have this other bill that we haven't talked about, this SB 679, which would create a housing authority for Los Angeles, which has sort of been in the news a lot about homelessness and housing. So all of these keep me up at night because I'm trying to think of ways to talk to my colleagues, all 119 of them, by the way, because I've got ABs and SBs, about the merits of the bill and listening to their concerns and trying to address them. So I've been getting in my cardio. I don't know how you do it. Going back and forth, SBs and ABs, and just hitting the ground running in March with no pomp and no circumstance. And
I know.
It's extraordinary.
I know. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes I have low days, but sometimes we have good days. So
I hope the latter becomes more the common.
Well, I'll tell you, I was getting ready for the podcast, and I came in, and my staff was like, "Oh, you look so great today." And I was like, "Yeah, it's the podcast." And then I was like,
"Oh, this is audio. That's okay. That's right." I understand completely. All right, the underlying themes of your legislative package remind me how much I really genuinely covet your detailed reaction to the social and racial justice touchstones in the news of this past spring, with the searing memories last summer of the death of George Floyd at the knee of one of the members of the Minneapolis Police Department, and that 9-minute-plus video that set America's soul on fire. And then, here we are nearly a year later, the trial of the officer Derek Chauvin, who was, I think to the shock of nearly every American who's not used to seeing law enforcement held accountable, was convicted by a part of the justice system that was finally able to give us a rare glimpse of what police accountability actually looks like. I want to get your take and your perspective on these. First, the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. His death spurred this broad global change last year. But has anything changed?
Yes. I think what's changed is we have a lot of non-black people trying to co-opt a movement about the black experience without really genuflecting on their own responsibility to how we got here. So I'm hoping folks don't continue to talk about George Floyd and the lives of black folks without recognizing the role that they have played in getting us here. And I feel like that is now getting more and more lost because folks love a little bit of rhetoric and they love to be guilt-free. But we all have played a role in getting us where we are. If it's the silence, if it's not talking about the real issues, if it's about playing into the stereotypes and the tropes that pit us against them. So I hope we kind of move away from the fake kumbaya that we are prone to kind of, succumb to, and focus on the real issues around economics and racial injustice.
Do you think this last year has been full of a lot of the fake kumbaya from nonprofits, from corporations, from every business that felt compelled to stand up and speak out? We are diverse. We promote diversity.
Well, after George Floyd, I think U.S. companies pledged $50 billion to fight against racial injustice. Only $250 million of those dollars have actually gone out into the community. Of course, now we see more Black and brown and Asian folks in videos and commercials and ads, but that's window dressing. Because if you're still fighting to get bills across the floor that actually are going to create some systemic change, and you would rather talk about how you have a diversified field of tennis players or artists, on a show, then that means we have a lot more work to do.
Let's talk about the trial and the conviction of Derek Chauvin.
Yeah.
His conviction was called a Me Too moment in looking at the bloody contention between race and policing. Everybody says one battle won, but the war continues. What was your reaction to that verdict from just a month or so ago?
I was surprised and relieved. I was afraid of what would happen to many folks if he had not been convicted. I was relieved that people listened to the evidence. I mean, this was a person who was not well trained, was not well educated, and he was actually responsible for perpetuating the culture that was in that department because he was training folks. I mean, and look what he did. He had absolutely showed no remorse, and people really shared their traumas around witnessing this, trying to stop it, actually trying to help him. So I was relieved, I was saddened, I was heartbroken that this man was killed in front of the world, and that there was so much trauma from those men and women and young people that stood on that corner watching him die and feeling as helpless as they felt. It was so painful.
And do you think that there was a lot of that helpless feeling that was echoed across the country and the world?
Yeah. I mean, listening to the one witness who said he cried out for his mother, and he said, I cried out for my mother and I couldn't do anything. And we said, hey, man, stop. And then the young kid who felt like maybe I killed him because I called the police. I mean, that reverberated for so many folks, right, who have been in these other kinds of situations. And that's why I say we all play a role. We have a responsibility to use our voice and conquer our fear to say stop, but the fear that so many people have to say no to a law enforcement officer who has a gun. Right? And are you seen? Are you valued as a Black person, as a brown person, as someone with a tattoo, as someone in a lower class neighborhood? Do they see you? Do they want to save you? Those were the things that were going through so many people's heads watching this trial. And invariably, the answers to those questions were no. I don't feel like people see me, like they value me. He did not value the life of George Floyd.
As a parent, putting on the mom lens again, how have you framed the discussion of the events of this last year with your own children?
Well, we have a lot of discussions with my stepdaughter and my stepson about this. With my stepdaughter about how to protect herself, and also how to kind of, look out. If you see something, say something, but also how to look out for her brother. We talk a lot to my stepson about how he's perceived and the rights that he has, and he should know what those rights are. My husband is an attorney who deals in this world a lot, and I talk to him about his experiences and my fears for him when he goes out. He knows his rights, and so that also means sometimes he has a lot of aggressive interactions with law enforcement because of it. So we are very honest. We're very honest about our work with them so that they know how perilous it is to be Black. And we remind them that not many people see in them what we see in them. And so it's important to be honest about that.
Here we are in 2021 in so-called liberal woke California. a state that has been through its own growing pains with racial hatred and bias. Like we're some sort of racial paradise, we sometimes market ourselves as, but as some have asked, and you mentioned being the Black Panther type, if we were this racial paradise, would the Black Panthers have had to have been created back in the 60s? There's still this war being waged on black bodies in the state, on Asian Americans, on Latinos. So just as we wrap here, as a black female lawmaker who works every day to balance the scales of social and racial justice, who doesn't hold back from marching in the streets with her communities when the outrage calls for it, is California a safe place to be black? Is it a safe place to be from a community of color? And can it be more so in our own lifetimes?
Sometimes it's safe, but sometimes it's not. I think California prides itself on being incredibly progressive, but sometimes that means the prejudice and the racism is subdural. And
Under the skin.
Yes. And that, I think, is more dangerous. I wonder, would we be better off if people were just upfront about their fears, their prejudices, their hatreds, what they don't want, so that we can have more honest conversations. It is okay to have those beliefs, to put them out there so people can talk about them in ways that keep everyone safe. There's a difference between belief and behavior. So I don't know if we are necessarily safer here in California, because if you have something that you espouse, but you don't practice it, then you're lying. And I don't think lying is safe. Now, we have great people here in the legislature, in government, on our streets, walking the walk, talking the walk, wanting to do right and doing right. And
You're one of them.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so that's important to acknowledge, too. We have more work that we can do. And I don't think we should rest on the laurels of being a progressive state and think that we've done all that there is to do.
Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for not resting on the laurels, for being so honest and sharing so much with us. This has been delightful and really food for thought. We have a buffet of thought here that we can share out there. I wish you luck with everything this year, that you don't have to spend too much time with that lonely plate and cup in your apartment.
I know, my one cup.
Yes, and you know, I got to tell you, if you ever find yourself needing to share some thoughts that just don't fit right into your format for your Watch Wednesdays, your voices and your opinions have a home here. So on our podcast.
I'm going to take you up on that. Little orphan Annie is going to take you up on that.
Okay. Senator Sidney Kamlager, thank you very much for joining us here on Then There's California.
Thank you for having me.
And that brings us to a close of this edition of Then There's California. We are a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus with technical assistance and support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulte, Brian Shadden, and Rainier Sabiniano, Gunjan Patel, McLeana Woods, Lisa Murphy, Ann DeGrazia, Marvin Richardson, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. On behalf of State Senator Sidney Kamlager, representing California's 30th Senate District in Los Angeles, I'm Brian Green at the State Capitol in Sacramento. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.